Thanks to the sheltered lives and the adverse effects of inbreeding, a lot of history's kings, queens, and other royals became known for their eccentricities. There was Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who delighted in torturing her servants and was even rumoured to bathe in the blood of virgins. Then there was Guillaume Gaston of Italy, who was so lazy that he spent the latter part of his reign bedridden. And then there was Anna of Russia, who so enjoyed humiliating others that she was known to ridicule her underlings by making them marry one another while dressed as clowns. But these rulers were normal compared to some of their counterparts, and in many cases the cruelty, vanity, and insanity of those in power would go on to have dire consequences for the countries that they led. And in the video today, we're looking at 10 of these rather strange monarchs. Number 10. Zhengde of China, reign 1505 to 1521. The Ming dynasty's strangest emperor, Zhu Houzhou, also known as the Zhengde Emperor, took to the throne of China at the age of just 14. Not long after becoming emperor, Zhengde became drunk with power. He neglected his duties as ruler and instead chose to spend his time drinking and visiting brothels, which he filled with women of his choosing. He built lavish palaces to store exotic animals like tigers and leopards, and he would often have them turned loose so that he could hunt them down for his own amusement. Even weirder, Zhengde would have his servants go to great lengths to dress up the inside of his palace to look like a city block. He would then command all of the court employees to pretend to be vendors and passers-by so that he could stroll down the street and pretend to be an everyday person. This sort of childish behavior made Zhengde notorious with the court, and some historians have credited him with starting a trend of dissipation among emperors that would ultimately lead to the fall of the Ming dynasty. Strangest behavior? Zhengde died rather comically in 1521, supposedly as a result of infections he contracted from falling into a canal while drunk. But his strangest exploit took place a few years before his death in 1518, when the emperor suddenly decided that he would like to be in the military and declared himself a general. He personally led an expedition to another province in order to catch a prince who had revolted against his authority, only to find out that this man had already been rounded up. Angry at having his chance to play soldier ruined, Zhengde ordered the man released just so that he could experience the thrill of hunting him down and capturing him himself. Number 9. Friedrich Wilhelm I of Prussia, reign 1713 to 1740. Although he enjoyed a peaceful tenure as king, Prussia's Friedrich Wilhelm I is most remembered today for his enduring affection for the military. He would frequently drill his army units himself and enjoyed having them march before him even when he was sick and confined to bed. An ascetic man who was known to enjoy sleeping in the soldiers' barracks, he made it his personal goal to see Prussia's army become the most glorious in all of Europe. This obsession even extended into his own family. He wished to make his son Friedrich II into a good soldier and had the boy awoken each morning with the firing of a cannon. He even gave Friedrich II a small arsenal and a complement of child soldiers to command, and had the boy beaten whenever he failed to perform well in his training. Not surprisingly, Friedrich II eventually tried to run away, but he was captured and briefly imprisoned by his own father. Strangest behavior? The king's strangest behavior was undoubtedly his obsession with creating the Potsdam Giants, a special army regiment comprised of only the tallest and the strongest soldiers. The Giants were a pet project of Friedrich Wilhelm's, and he went about recruiting them by any means necessary. Mercenaries were hired. One Irish soldier of fortune stood some 7 feet tall, and neighboring kingdoms were known to send the Prussians their tallest fighters as a means of encouraging friendly diplomatic relations. In his efforts to gather as many suitable recruits as possible, the cutoff was 6'2", very tall for the era. Friedrich Wilhelm I even resorted to ordering that all tall young boys be conscripted into the unit, and tall men and women were encouraged to have kids together. Number 8. Ludwig II of Bavaria, reign 1864 to 1886. One of Bavaria's most beloved and eccentric monarchs was Ludwig II, who became famous for his strange personality and his obsession with building enchanting and whimsical castles. Ludwig had a troubled family life, and as a child he would lose himself in arts, music, and elaborate fantasy worlds. This behavior carried over into his reign as king, which began when he was only 18. He disliked public appearances, preferring instead to stay inside of the castle alone, where he would frequently have operas and plays performed for him. This is not to say that Ludwig was a shut-in, though. He was known to travel about Bavaria and would often stop and chat with any subjects that he met along the way. The king's unassuming nature earned him the adoration of the people, but it drew the ire of the high-ranking court employees who planned to have him removed from power. The conspirators provided a list of Ludwig's eccentricities, among them talking to imaginary people, as well as poor manners, shyness, and even a penchant for moonlight picnics with naked male dancers. All of these were used to prove that the king was just a little bit insane. While the veracity of these claims is debatable, in 1886 Ludwig was declared unfit to rule and removed from power. In a mysterious twist, the king was found floating dead in a lake the very next day, prompting many to argue that he had been murdered by his rivals. Strangest behavior? Today Ludwig II is best remembered for the many fairy tale castles that he built around Bavaria. He was obsessive about their construction and frequently traveled abroad to consult with architects and builders. One of the most elaborate is Schloss Neuschwanstein, a stunning fortress inspired by the works of Richard Wagner that Ludwig had built on the edge of a cliff. Ludwig invested considerable time and money in his castles, and at one point he nearly bankrupted the kingdom with his architectural habits. Ironically, today the castles are some of the most famous and lucrative tourist attractions in all of Bavaria. Number 7. Charles VI of France, reign 1380 to 1422. Also known as Charles the Mad, Charles VI was the ruler of France during the 100 Years' War. Charles exhibited signs of psychosis and paranoia early in life, and modern historians have postulated that he may have been schizophrenic. His mental illness first manifested itself in 1392 when he had a fit while traveling through a forest on horseback. According to accounts from those present, the king became disorientated and frantic and attacked several of his own men, even killing one knight, before his servants were able to subdue him. From then on, Charles's behavior had only worsened. He would frequently forget who he was and had to be reminded that he was the king. During another episode, he refused to bathe or change his clothes for several months. Charles VI was also known to run wildly through the halls of his palace for no reason, and for his own safety, the doors eventually had to be boarded up. Strangest behavior? Charles's strangest bout of madness was noted by Pope Pius II, who wrote that the king once became convinced that he was made out of glass and could break into pieces. Fearful of shattering, Charles took to wearing padded clothing and commanded that he should not be touched. The Middle Ages saw several different cases of this disorder, which has since become known as the glass delusion. Number 6. Qin Shi Huang of China, reign 246 BC to 221 BC, king of Qin, and 221 BC to 210 BC as the emperor of China. While he was a capable, albeit brutal administrator, in his personal life, China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, had some serious issues. Chief among them was a crippling fear of death that led him to spend the majority of his life searching for the key to immortality. Qin Shi Huang was forever wary of the possibility of his enemies making an attempt on his life, to the point that he never slept in the same place twice and regularly carried a massive crossbow at his side when traveling. Revealing the emperor's whereabouts was deemed a capital crime, and after a while, underground passageways were constructed that allowed him to travel unseen between his different palaces. Later in life, Qin Shi Huang began construction on a massive tomb that, in the event of his death, would protect him from his enemies. The monument contained over 8,000 life-size terracotta soldiers, along with a miniature city for the king to rule over in the afterlife. Of course, all of this was just a precaution, and in the meantime, the emperor consulted soothsayers, apothecaries, and other spiritualists in the hope of finding some kind of elixir that would extend his life or even make him immortal. Strangest behavior? Qin Shi Huang's paranoia wasn't completely unwarranted. During his reign, there were 3 attempts on his life, but his suspicions, they were often directed in completely nonsensical directions. For example, one of the emperor's most enduring fears was the threat of being killed by a sea monster. He claimed to have dreamed that the creatures were on the prowl for him, so he never left his palace without a posse of guards. This paranoia eventually led to his death in the most ironic way possible. After going on a hunt to find one of these sea creatures and slaying a beached whale, he developed an illness a few days later and died. Number 5. Emperor Norton I, reign 1859 to 1880, unofficially. In the 19th century, the United States was officially ruled by Emperor Norton I, a San Francisco native who declared himself Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. Emperor Norton's real name was Joshua Abraham Norton. British national, he came to the US in 1849 as a wealthy man, but a string of poor investments left him nearly broke. His financial troubles supposedly led to him developing a number of eccentricities and delusions of grandeur, and in 1859 he officially declared himself the ruler of America. Local newspapers originally published Norton's claim as a joke, but he became beloved by San Francisco locals who gave him a regal uniform and addressed him in public as Your Highness. Norton spent much of his early reign issuing edicts to dissolve the corrupt US Congress and officially declare him emperor. But when his efforts were ignored, he turned to local matters. He was known to stroll through the city streets, inspecting roads and buildings, and he even issued his own money, which was widely accepted by local merchants. Norton was a poor man, but he was allowed to eat in San Francisco's finest restaurants and was given seats to any new play that opened. In exchange, he would place an imperial seal of approval by the establishment's front door. Norton I died in 1880 after collapsing in the street. Grand obituaries were written in all of the local papers, and his funeral was supposedly attended by as many as 30,000 people. Strangest behavior? Despite his obvious mental problems, Norton I often demonstrated remarkable foresight. He proposed that a League of Nations be formed years before the US government considered it, and he decreed that a bridge be built linking Oakland and San Francisco, which also eventually became a reality. But this doesn't mean all of his edicts were completely rational. In 1872, he declared that anyone who referred to his fair city by the abominable word Frisco would be fined the sum of $25. Number 4. Ibrahim I of the Ottoman Empire, reign 1640 to 1648. Also known as Ibrahim the Mad, Ibrahim I was the most mentally unstable of a series of insane and cruel Turkish sultans that ruled the Ottoman Empire during the 16th and 17th centuries. Ibrahim is believed to have suffered from a host of mental illnesses, all of which were no doubt encouraged by the Cage, a windowless building where he was kept for most of his youth. When his brother died in 1640, 23-year-old Ibrahim was released and he was declared sultan. Ecstatic and more than a bit unhinged, he immediately made up for lost time by building a harem of virgins to satisfy his voracious sexual appetite. Ibrahim supposedly enjoyed having his concubine gather in a palace courtyard so that he could gallop around them while neighing like a stallion. He also had a fetish for fat women and at one point sent his servants on a quest to find the heftiest lady in all of the land. They returned with a 350-pound woman nicknamed Sugar Cube who became a favorite member of his harem. Ibrahim's excesses, they didn't end with sex though. The Sultan was also greedy and his agents frequently looted houses to provide him with perfumes, clothes, and anything else he desired. He was also notoriously violent. In addition to ordering executions and torture at will, Ibrahim once threw his baby son into a pool of water and later stabbed the boy in the face out of anger. This kind of debauchery and wanton cruelty won Ibrahim his fair share of enemies, and in 1648 a coup was staged. After being captured, the Sultan was briefly put back into the cage before being strangled to death by a gang of assassins. Strangest behavior? Ibrahim was known for his impulsive, terrifically violent behavior. For example, when the Sultan received information that a member of his harem had been compromised, he proceeded to have a number of the women tortured. When he couldn't get any of them to give a name, Ibrahim had 280 members of the harem thrown into a lake, and they drowned. Number 3. Juana I of Spain, reign 1504 to 1555. Also known as Juana the Mad, Juana de Castile became the first queen of the Habsburg dynasty when she married Philip of Burgundy in 1496. The couple started out madly in love, which is pretty unusual for an arranged royal marriage, but they soon became rather complicated. Juana was as jealous as Philip was promiscuous, and his infidelity soon drove her into a state of extreme paranoia. Because her husband would chase after any attractive lady of the court, Juana took to only including old and ugly women in her retinue, and in one case she even attacked a woman who she believed to be her husband's mistress. Desperate for Philip to be true to her, Juana started consulting sorcerers and using love potions, and when her husband ignored her, she even briefly went on a hunger strike. Whether Juana was actually crazy or not is pretty debatable, but this kind of erratic behavior eventually got her locked away in a castle, where she remained for the latter part of her life. Strangest behavior? Queen Juana's eccentricities ramped up considerably in 1506 when Philip died after a brief illness. Utterly distraught, Juana constantly wore black and wept uncontrollably, and she even had the coffin opened on several occasions so that she could kiss the feet of her husband's corpse. Worried that her husband would cheat even in death, Juana forbid any women from coming near his coffin, even nuns. Number 2. George III of England, reign 1760 to 1820. Perhaps the most famous case of royal madness involved England's George III, who suffered from recurring bouts of mental illness throughout the latter part of his life. Modern historians have theorized that the king probably suffered from porphyria, blood disease, but George's doctors were forever at a loss to diagnose his condition. The king would rant, rave, and insult and curse his servants to the point that his caretakers were often forced to gag him and confine him with a straitjacket. A team of doctors were enlisted to help the king, but their primitive treatments, which included everything from purging and blistering to bloodletting, only seemed to make his condition worse. Surprise, surprise! Soon enough, the king became delusional. He developed the belief that London was flooding, gave orders to imaginary or long-dead court officials, and once even tried to sexually assault one of his servants. In a rather bizarre episode on Christmas Day, the king named his pillow Prince Octavius and celebrated that it was to be newborn this day. The king did have moments of clarity, and for a time his illness abated, but with age the delusions returned, and after losing a good deal of his sight and hearing, George III was kept in seclusion until his death. Strangest behavior? One of King George's more bizarre delusions occurred during the first outbreak of his illness, when he met and developed an obsession with a woman named Elizabeth Spencer. In the heat of his infatuation, George began to believe that he and Elizabeth were actually married, and he even claimed that his own wife, Queen Charlotte, was an imposter intent on killing him. Number 1. Caligula Reign, 37 AD to 41 AD. Caligula only served as Rome's emperor for 4 years, but in that short span he managed to establish himself as one of the cruelest and weirdest rulers in history. He was only 25 when he rose to power, and while for the first 2 years of his reign he was well liked and seemed like a capable leader, those in the know rarely doubted that the emperor was anything but stark raving mad. These psychotic tendencies would eventually come out in some of Caligula's laws. For one, he made it illegal for anyone to look him in the face, an offense that was punishable by being thrown into a lion's den. He also delighted in torture and executions and took great pains to think up new ways to dispatch his enemies. One of his personal favorites was said to involve covering the condemned in honey and setting loose an army of wasps. Of course, today Caligula is best known for his deviant sexual behavior. This involved everything from bisexuality and bestiality to even incest. He was rumored to have slept with all 3 of his sisters. He was also fond of great excesses, and along with declaring himself a demigod and frequently holding gluttonous feasts and parties, Caligula turned the imperial palace into a veritable whorehouse, complete with days-long orgies. Not surprisingly, Caligula's insanity and cruelty eventually drew the ire of his political rivals, who successfully murdered the emperor and his family in AD 41. Strangest behavior? Some of Caligula's weirdest exploits involved his favorite horse. The emperor dressed the animal in lavish blankets and had it housed in a marble stable and tended to by a small army of handlers. Caligula even let the horse eat from the table during dinner parties, and guests were frequently invited to the palace at the horse's behest. Still, the most ridiculous extravagance came when Caligula announced his intention to make the horse an official citizen of Rome, and later a consul, and even a priest. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below, and don't forget to subscribe. Got brand new videos just like this every day of the week. If you're looking for more from me, why not check out my other channel called Today I Found Out? You will find that linked to below. And as always, thank you for watching.